The movie begins in the year 2038, introducing a man named George Almore, who resides in a futuristic area in Japan. George lives with two box-like robots, J1 and J2, both of which are prototypes for a third robot, J3, that George is currently working on. These robots, created by George, are all designed with female personas. J1 is a large, nonverbal box requiring George's care as it has limited capabilities. J2 is slightly smaller than J1 and can speak like a human. George interacts with J2 frequently, as it helps alleviate his loneliness. The robots, interestingly, have emotions. One night, J2 tells George about a dream where they were driving together. This surprises George, who asks where they were going, but J2 doesn't know. Within George's home, there is a large box called the Archive, which is essentially a collection of information. An archive is a place, institution, or group where information is collected and stored. In this movie, the archive serves a similar purpose, but in a unique way. George receives a video call, and on the other end is his wife, Jules. However, Jules isn't alive. She died in a car accident 2 or 3 years ago while she was pregnant, causing George to lose both his wife and child. This traumatic event haunts George, and he often dreams about his wife's last moments, leaving a small injury mark on his face. So, who is George talking to? This version of Jules is part of the archive, which, using advanced technology in the year 2038, allows George to store and interact with her memories and likeness. In this movie, the data of deceased individuals is stored on a digital platform, allowing their loved ones to interact with them through calls even after death. This means that although the person is physically gone, their mind or soul can be preserved in the archive, enabling them to stay connected to the living world. Now let's talk about J3. George is working on J3 in this mountainous area of Japan, driven by a secret. He is deeply in love with his wife and can't bear to live without her. His goal is to resurrect his dead wife in a technical way. To achieve this, he has created robots J1 and J2. These robots contain the complete data of his deceased wife, which George has stored and transferred into them. By doing this, George hopes to bring his wife back to life through his robotic creations. George wants to give his wife's mind a robotic body so they can live happily together. However, his robots have all stopped at different developmental stages. For instance, when he created J1, he stopped her development at the age of 5, making her mind like that of a young child. This is why George cares for J1 the most, as she watches cartoons and has the emotions of a child. With J3, George's third attempt, the development progressed to adulthood and continues to develop slowly. J3 has a human-like body and can even taste fruits and recall some of George's wife's memories, as it contains all her data. J3 is currently in the data syncing stage, integrating the memories and characteristics of George's wife. You might wonder why George is making so many robots. The answer lies in his relentless pursuit to successfully resurrect his wife in a form that allows them to be together once more. George lives in a large place and works for an organization that funds his projects, expecting him to develop robots for them. However, George deceives his boss by only showing J1 during video calls, making his boss believe he's still working on the subsequent prototypes. In reality, George's true goal is to revive his wife, and his organization's expectations don't matter to him. This leads to complications, particularly with J2, the teenage robot who has developed feelings and emotions. J2 becomes jealous of J3, feeling neglected by George, who is now focused on J3. J2 is aware that J3, being human-like, receives more attention and is more advanced than J2, who is still a box-like robot. This jealousy stems from the fear that George no longer needs or values J2 as much. George becomes angry with J2, and watching the movie makes you empathize with J2 despite being a robot. It's similar to having a best friend who starts ignoring you when someone new comes along. J2 feels this way, leading to moments where she stands alone by the river, feeling lonely. In her distress, J2 starts breaking tools and even hides J3 from George. When George discovers this, he becomes furious and asks J2 if she is okay. J2 simply responds that she is not okay. The situation escalates when George needs to make legs for J3 but lacks the necessary tools. Desperately, he removes J2's legs while she is sleeping and modifies them to create legs for J3. George puts an old useless leg on J2, making her feel even worse. Instead of upgrading her, George is using her parts for another robot, J3. Once George fully upgrades J3, giving her a human appearance and covering her with skin that resembles his wife, J3 begins to remember George's wife. They dance together, and when J2 sees this, she is heartbroken. Feeling completely abandoned, J2 goes to the sea and dies. Towards the end of the movie, George's boss discovers that George has been lying about his progress. He learns that George has created a human-like robot containing his wife's memories. Furious, the boss terminates their agreement and orders George to stop his work. Guards start attacking George's house, but George insists that J3 is finally ready to embody his wife completely. In the movie, George plans to transfer his wife's data from the archive to J3's memory, replacing all of J3's existing data. The logic here is that while J3 has partial data and memories, the complete and authentic data set of his wife resides in the archive. George wants to ensure that J3 becomes a perfect replica of his wife with all her original memories. Initially, J3 refuses the transfer, likely due to concerns about losing her current identity. However, she eventually agrees, considering George's desire to have his wife back. As the transfer begins, it seems like an error might occur, suggesting potential complications. At first, J3 doesn't respond, creating suspense. Eventually, she does respond, but it's revealed that she remains J3 and hasn't fully transformed into George's wife. The movie's twist comes when George receives a call from the archive, which he believes is impossible since he thought all the data had been transferred. This implies that despite his efforts, the full integration of his wife's data didn't happen as expected, and some part of her still exists separately in the archive. Wow, that's a powerful twist. In the movie's ending, it's revealed that George himself was the one who died in the car accident, not his wife. His wife and their unborn daughter survived, and the world we've been seeing throughout the film, where George was trying to bring back his wife through robots in the archive, is actually inside the archive itself. This revelation changes the entire perspective of the story. It shows that George's efforts to recreate his wife were actually manifestations of his own consciousness within the archive, where he believed he was still alive and trying to reunite with his wife. The emotional depth is heightened by the realization that George's wife and daughter have been living separate lives outside the archive, while George himself has been grappling with his own grief and longing inside this virtual world. This twist underscores the themes of memory, loss, and the complexities of identity in a futuristic setting where technology blurs the lines between reality and simulation. In the end of the movie, with the revelation that George is already dead and everything we've seen is his imagination within the archive, the focus shifts to how this realization impacts George's existence in this simulated reality. Since George's entire experience has been an illusion created by the archive machine, he may come to understand that he needs to let go of his attempts to recreate his wife and move towards acceptance of his death. This could be a moment of profound realization and closure for him, as he recognizes that the memories and interactions he sought to preserve were never real in the conventional sense. The ending might explore themes of closure, acceptance, and the consequences of living in a simulated reality. It could depict George finding peace or resolution, perhaps by understanding the nature of his existence and letting go of his attachment to the artificial constructs within the archive. Ultimately, the conclusion would likely emphasize the journey of coming to terms with loss and the complexities of memory and identity in a technological age where virtual realities can blur the lines between what's real and what's imagined.